welcome back to Consider This. Melisa and Sharaad here with you this evening. Now, last Saturday was World Pangolin Day, a day to raise awareness about the plight of the world's most trafficked mammal. Pangolins are now critically endangered, with more than 1 million pangolins poached in the past decade alone. Now, this is because pangolin meat is considered a delicacy, and their scales are falsely believed to be able to cure everything from impotence to acne. Now, to help us better understand the threat to pangolins and the conservation efforts needed to save them, we have joining us on the line Elizabeth John, Senior Communications Officer at Traffic, which is the Wildlife Trade Monitoring Network. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, I know that
thank you for having me.
There are many species currently under threat, so I'm just wondering, why is there special interest in pangolins specifically? I mean, what's unique about this species of mammal?
The reason why everyone is really worried about pangolins in particular is because of the numbers that we are seeing in trade, particularly the numbers that are being taken out of the wild. So whenever you hear about a pangolin seizure, it's never in a small number. And what we're finding out over the years is that they're being taken out at an industrial scale almost.
Elizabeth, there's, often when we hear stories about species driven to extinction, it's often about the destruction of their ecosystem, of their environment. This case is interesting because it seems to be driven by human demand. Can you tell us a little bit about the demand? We understand that China and Vietnam are the largest importers of pangolins. Could you give us more clarity on that situation?
Okay, so pangolins are illegal to trade across the globe. And so all this trade that you're seeing actually is illegal. And with regards to China and Vietnam, yes, they are the biggest destination for most of the shipments coming out of Asia and Africa. Just in case the viewers don't know, there are 4 species of pangolins in Asia and 4 in Africa. And all of them are under threat from trafficking because of the demand, as you mentioned earlier, for both meat and medicine. And just to give you an idea of the scale, when Traffic did a global analysis of seizures from 2010 to 2015, we discovered that an average of 20 tons of pangolins were being trafficked every year.
20 tons. That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
Where does Malaysia fit into this picture? I mean, pangolins are native to Malaysia, to the environments of both the peninsula and Sabah and Sarawak. Could you tell us a little bit more? Are we a major part of this trade route?
Yes, Malaysia is very much a big part of this trade route. There is some collection for consumption locally, but this is very small. Most of our role is in transit, meaning we serve as a conduit for pangolin parts coming from Africa and going to other parts of Asia.
Right. I'm just wondering, Elizabeth, in your experience, your work with Traffic, have you discovered whether it's the demand for the medicinal, the so-called medicinal purposes of the scales, or is it the demand for the meat that's driving this illegal trade?
It's both, Melissa. Locally, there will be demand for exotic meat. And when I say locally, I mean the whole of Southeast Asia. But the bigger demand is likely for the pangolin scales, which are used in traditional medicine.
Now, before we get to the question of changing people's attitudes towards pangolin meat and scales and busting those myths about them, could you give us a little bit more sense about why Malaysia would become a conduit for this trade? Does it have to do with customs clearance or the ease with which illegal substances can flow through Malaysia? What have you or research discovered about the reasons why Malaysia has become central to this?
There are many reasons. One of them is Malaysia's infrastructure is great. We have great ports, great roads, airports, and it's very easy to do business in Malaysia. And, just like any other commodity or product, it's very easy for anyone to use the ports and airports for transporting goods. And it's the same with criminals. They look for efficient systems everywhere in the world. Another reason why Malaysia plays a huge role is simply because there's so much coming into the ports and airports. Very often, pangolin smugglers will mislabel shipments. With the thousands of tons of products that come through a port every day, where does a customs or a police officer or a port authority begin to look for these shipments, which are, mislabeled, hidden under other items, or, simply wily smugglers will use all kinds of methods to mask these shipments.
Right. I mean, in terms of actually, when we look at, say, something analogous like the drug trade, to what extent does information, as you would put it, intelligence, play a part in stemming the tide of the illegal trade, getting people informants in any part of that supply chain to be telling the authorities that in fact there is going to be a consignment of pangolins. Is the fight against pangolin and endangered animal species, is it at that level of sophistication as the fight against drugs?
Yeah, wildlife traders are incredibly well organized, well financed, and very smart about what they do. They treat it like a business. And just to give you a sense of that, from that same study that I mentioned earlier, we found that smugglers used 27 new smuggling routes every year to trade pangolins.
Wow.
So, no matter how hard they try, to some extent, authorities are always maybe a step behind. Yeah, and as you mentioned, intel is critical, which is why we constantly ask people to report any suspicious activity or whatever information they may have. We also have massive programs to get the logistics sector, especially the airlines and couriers and other services that move goods in large quantities, to make this a part of their operations, being vigilant and helping authorities with information.
Elizabeth, very quickly before we wrap up for break. Now, when we talk about the illegal wildlife trade, there's always a supply and the demand, and we've spoken about the supply. What about the demand aspect? Has there been efforts in terms of behavioral change, communication, to change people's perceptions about pangolin meat and pangolin scales?
Yes, this has begun with some traffic programs in countries like China, where the demand is very high. But these are very big and expensive programs, and they take time to show results. As you know, changing anyone's mind is very much a long-term investment.
Sure. All right, well, thank you so much for speaking with us and sharing your insights with us tonight, Elizabeth. Now we're going to take a quick break on Consider This, and we'll be back with more, so stay tuned.